and you're listening to Teacher Talk, an ETT Podcast production.
Hi, and welcome to ETT, a podcast, Teacher Talk. And I'm with Betty Zhang today, and we're here today to talk about the power of sort of creating your own vibrant lesson planning. And I know as teachers, sometimes there's so much pressure to devise great lessons, and sometimes we have to sort of find other lessons that are crafted for us in this new technology age. Sometimes it's really easy to just draw upon other lessons. But Betty, one thing I found from watching your work from afar and working with you in the DLL program is that you create some really engaging, fun, and sort of don't necessarily want to say original. There's an originality to it, but there's an ownership to it. And I sort of know in my 23 years of teaching that I like to borrow and take other lessons, but somehow as a teacher, there's always something a little bit more invigorating when we can talk about and build our own lessons. And maybe there's almost a little bit more engagement when students see us as part of that process. And so, welcome to the show. Sort of share some of your journey in teaching and how you got started and sort of your passion to sort of craft your own projects. And then I would love to talk specifically about one project and then move on to that continued general theme of the power of teachers building their own lessons.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on this show. Well, for me, because I am a practicing artist, so it's quite natural for me to want to create something of my own. I definitely see value in borrowing others' work and giving credit to where I took it from. But as I take an idea, usually an inspiration, it could be from TikTok, it could be from YouTube, or just from watching someone else work or at a PD session, I like to take that maybe just one element of it and then expand on that and make it my own. And sometimes I would tweak it based on the needs of my students and what I hope to achieve with that. So for example, I've seen projects done where, let's say they use the idea of Angry Bird and the trajectory of that to teach students how to graph parabolas. And it was a really interesting small lesson. And then I expanded on that and then turned it into a group project where they have to graph multiple different graphs that follows different things like no solution or one solution or two different solutions kind of parabolas, and they have to create their own level. So each one they have to kind of aim it so that it clears out a piece of the level that they created, the Angry Bird level. And in the end, they put everything together and made it into a stop motion GIF.
Oh, stop motion GIF. They must have been really connected to that sort of fun little hook there at the end.
Oh yeah, so they were cutting out Angry Birds, like different Angry Birds, and they were cutting out different pieces, and they were building their own level, and they were talking amongst themselves like, okay, this one is going to hit this pig first, and we're going to get rid of that, and then the next graph, we're going to hit this part, and we're going to get rid of that column, and then they'll fall, and then it will crash a pig underneath, and the next one can hit this one, and we can clear the level. So based on how many students are there in the group, that's how many graphs that they had. And each one have to have a different characteristic. So they really have to put the math into it, and they have to really solve a problem they created for themselves creatively. And then at the very end, I taught them how to do stop motion animation. And then each student submitted their artwork and the GIF as the final project.
I like the fact that it's not just engagement, but there's that content and that learning that's in it as well. I've often talked about, people say, oh, are those students engaged? Those students engaged. And I've always said engagement doesn't mean learning. Engagement, it can be an access point to learning. But what I hear there is you got those students hooked on that nice Angry Bird engagement, and then they're able to connect it back to their learning. one thing I liked hearing is you talk about inspiration, and you reference a bunch of different spaces. You reference sometimes it's very professional PD, and this is where I get my inspiration from, but sometimes it's from watching TikToks, or it's watching another teacher teach. That notion that maybe the teacher down the hall is maybe one of the most valuable resources, but we never get to tap into it. I'd like, if you can expand on that, like as a teacher, where are you looking and where do you find these inspirations? So I really like the fact that you talked about, I'm not just solely going to my professional development and absorbing everything here. I weave that with other things that I'm seeing in my personal life and then when I'm going in that social media space to be very original in my own planning. I'd love if you could expand a little bit on that thought, where you see these inspirations and maybe where you had the greatest inspiration or how you weave them together.
So for me, I don't think there is a spot. I'm constantly looking for new things. What I like to do is, after a few years of teaching, we have a set kind of lesson or that we like to do for a certain course. But what I like to do is I like to disrupt that and challenge myself and my students with at least one unit that's different from before. Whether it's collaboration, we're tweaking it a little bit or completely changing it, or I experiment with my students. And it could be anything that I see on the street as I'm watching videos. I'm like, oh, this could be an interesting project in the future. And I kind of park in the back of my mind until the right time came along, or maybe I see a new material that popped up. And I'm like, I can combine this with that idea. So it's a constant, it's always in the back of my mind. And then it may not be this year that I get to realize that. It could be the year 1 or 2 years down the road. I've bought materials where I thought could be interesting for a project 2 years ago. And then I didn't use it until last semester, and it was great. So I feel like there shouldn't be any rush, right, in creating new lessons, and there shouldn't be any pressure or stress associated with it, right? Take it a step at a time. If you have 5 great lessons, right, don't force yourself to change all of them. Pick one or one part of it, and then add a twist. Right. And then this way you can sort of see how students react to that. And if there's any way you can expand and change the rest of them.
There's some great points right there. I like the fact that you talked about you don't need to rush anything. If maybe an inspiration now doesn't manifest into like a restructuring of a unit or a lesson for maybe a few years. And I think teachers do need to hear that there isn't necessarily this pressure to come up with something with new and original all the time. As you talked about that, I was reminded of when how I was inspired myself. And you're right, you have your resources, your books, your PD. But I remember I used to love watching epic rap battles of history. And so for our African Heritage Assembly, we did a series of epic rap battles for history and that. And we had students that were crafting Harriet Tubman and Rosa Parks and having this rap battle. And it was a really engaging project. But I didn't have any PD beforehand or any notion other than I've seen this in the social media space or YouTube. I said, how can I do this in class? And it was an all-encompassing project with lots of failures and lots of, I should have done this. I should have push some music this way so students weren't trying to find music. As you went through, you realize all these portions that you knew if you did it again, you could do it better later. And I think often teachers feel this pressure. You talk about that pressure. If they're good at design, right, are you able to sort of have that design thinking process? And can you live with the result of trying to learn on the go? And I know when I've taken on projects like that, I have many great successes, but for every success is probably 7 failures or 6 missteps. Or like, should have planned that. I didn't anticipate this. It's sort of like the law of unintended consequences. And your students, when they engage in some of your new learning or your different tasks, they'll highlight that for you. And I think there's that notion that you have to become sort of an active practitioner in trying to learn as you go, to sort of help have students, they will see things that you don't anticipate as sort of a teacher. One project I wanted to talk specifically on was you had this wonderful sort of wire figurine and fashion design. And you shared so many of your great projects, but that one really caught my eye because I was thinking, how could I incorporate this into a middle school? But you had this wonderful sort of wire structure where students, I guess, crafted this a human figurine, human silhouette, and then they had done fashion design around it. And you know what? I had seen sort of the wire figurine stuff before, but I'd never seen it weave together with, I don't know exactly what the task was, this fashion component that was linked to it. This was a wonderful project. And those of you listening to the episode, don't worry, attached will be some pictures of this, so you can go and take a look at this great project. But Betty, specifically, tell me a little bit about how you came to, this project came into manifestation. And when you think about curriculum and content and what it connects to, maybe as a teacher, like as a language teacher or as a math teacher, where could I see where a project like this could be an access point for me to see students' competency in subjects like that?
I think this project was just it's a perfect example of how things just kind of fall into place. Many years ago, I read an article by Hargreaves and O'Connor called Collaborative Professionalism. In there, they basically talked about there is a middle ground between trust and precision. At the time, they use the word solidarity and solidity. Trust means you have a good working relationship with your colleagues. And precision or solidity means there is solid foundation for your teaching practice. Like both has to in place for a collaboration to be both professional and impactful for both students and teachers. So since my first day here in this school, I've been trying to foster a good relationship with everyone in the school because I know that they're my teammates, they're my colleagues, right? They are my inspiration, my source of inspiration, they're my partners, and there's so much that we can learn from each other. So I know that I need to have that mutual understanding and trust if I want to move forward with some sort of collaborative project. And then secondly is once we have that trust and we have that openness to discuss ideas and allow, I guess, some sort of interruption to our normal routines, then there is a space to talk about how we can collectively create something. And it just so happened that I found some wires in my storage. So there you go. That was, I've been looking at the wires. I'm like, what can I do with them? And I personally have worked with wires before. And I know that it seems difficult at the beginning, but once they get the hang of it, it's a very malleable and very flexible. It's has a very high potential material. So then I was thinking maybe the students can use that to learn about human anatomy, right? And freestanding sculpture, right, for my visual arts students. And then I was like, oh, what else can we do? And I wanted to kind of make that into like a dolls that students can play around with. And I thought about, okay, maybe then we can have the fashion teacher create a lesson around that. And they can actually design clothes for these dolls. And then I'm like, well, if they have dolls, why don't we have a doll house? So I approached our wood construction teacher and asked, is it possible for your students to create doll houses? Because I saw on the walls on the display in the wood shop that they had these single layer, like bungalow doll houses built, like just the structure of it. So I put the two and two together and be like, oh, why don't we make our own doll house? Make it 2 floors. And then I was like, okay, now we have the house, we have the dolls. What else do we need? We need furniture. So then I gave that as a culminating to my grade 12s to make miniature furnitures that will fit into this dollhouse with specified dimensions. So that was just like a whole thought process that all came into one, and then everybody was on board. We had all the materials, and yeah, and that's how it kind of came to be. And I'm just really grateful that, you know, all the students were on board, all the teachers were on board, and the result was really great. And now Churchill has her own miniature dollhouse.
That's a fantastic story. I've got a few points I'd love to talk about. I love the power of collaboration, and not just collaboration, but sort of an appreciation and a knowledge of what people in your building, the skill sets they have. Teachers generally have sort of shared skills, but they also have their own little passion projects, and they have their own unique set of skills. And it seems like with this project, you really were able to tap into what teachers are excited about and that they could build into this project. So I love that collaboration piece, that it wasn't just we're going to be a team, but I'm going to tap into what you're really good at, and it's going to make us sort of this dream team of sorts. I also wondered about planning, because we've sort of talked about inspiration, and sort of the two examples we gave earlier were sort of like, I saw something, so I decided to go for it. This type of project, I assume, but maybe incorrectly assume, there has to be, no, that doesn't have to be. Maybe there was a lot of front end planning. So did you start with the wire and the mannequins and the fashion design, and then say afterwards, oh, well, you know what would be neat is to add this on and then add this on? Or was your planning able to visualize this all beforehand? I'm not insinuating that one is better than the other, but I'm curious of the creative process. Did a lot of this thinking come beforehand? Or as you sort of get a great idea and you start, do then you have these new visions? You say, oh, I could try this and try this. And so the project is constantly evolving. So as you're doing quality work, there's an evolvement of the layers of those projects. So I would love a little bit, if you want to talk a little bit more on that power of collaboration, or on that design thinking process for you as a teacher and you're constructing. Do you want to front end everything, or do you want to try to be comfortable getting started and then letting it evolve as it goes? Or does it really depend on who you are as the teacher? What is your level of comfort? So let's say I'm very comfortable doing things ab lib, but I can't necessarily just assert that the teacher down the hallway is also as comfortable ab libbing. Perhaps their strength and their competency is rooted in their ability to front end plan. And I would argue, for me, it probably isn't. So I'd love to know, how did you plan something like that? Front end, was it evolving through time? And then a little bit more on that power of collaboration, just that theme of really tapping into your staff. I think teachers often think that they're there on their own. And I think we know in certain components we are. But we also need to realize, I've always said, even with my successes, every teacher in the building around me is a part of that success, whether it's direct or indirect. What we get to do in our building is never in a silo. And so I've often, as I've grown and matured as a teacher, I realize for every success that I've had, I always realize that every teacher allows me to act the way I do, teach the way I do, because if they didn't, then I wouldn't. And I think maybe as a newer teacher, I sort of put myself as it was me against the world, or it was just me, and I was thinking I was in some insular place. But as I've aged, I've always realized some teachers directly help you, but other teachers are helping you whether you directly know it or not. Even say, as I gave an example, if I'm doing a podcast recording in class and I keep 4 kids later and I don't really communicate it that well with the next subject, but the next subject teacher just sort of goes with the fly and they understand that I'm using these students for a few things, I realize in the bigger picture, that teacher that let me take those students for an extra 30 minutes or 45 minutes without conversation, they're just as integral to the success of that project as I was. But maybe 10 years ago, I wouldn't have thought even twice about their impact in allowing that project to manifest. And I hope that it's reciprocal, that when those teachers are involved in stuff, that I'm quick and easy in sort of modifying what I'm doing to facilitate their greater things. So believe it or not, Betty, there was a question in there, if you can remember it.
I remember there's 2 things. Power of collaboration. I think sometimes in the high school setting, it's even harder to collaborate because we usually have our own classrooms and we're usually in this classroom the entire day. Even if we do talk to others, it's usually in our own department. During staff meeting, it's just business. We're there together, meeting adjourned, gone. At lunchtime, I rarely see teachers from different departments sit together unless there's like they don't have their own office and they have to eat in the staff room because the microwave is there. So if that is the case, then I really try to ask what each other is doing when they're sharing their projects. I really listen and I say, okay, this is a great project. Is there any way I can collaborate with them and then change it so that it meets both their curriculum expectations and my curriculum expectation? I think just being alert and being, again, just constantly thinking about how I can turn this great conversation or this great idea into something that will fit in more than one curriculum. Because once I feel like we say, all right, this is the project that we think we can do, it hits all of these expectations, you can, and then, right, it's a lot easier to pitch an idea forward to a colleague. And oftentimes we look at each other's curriculums and we see, oh, here we can match this one to this one. We can match this to this. This unit is a little bit harder because it's just standalone. Right now, I don't really see any way to expand out of it. So then we pick and choose the easiest starting point. Right? That's what I'm saying. Don't stress out about it. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. There are some units that just aren't designed for collaboration. You just kind of have to teach it alone, and that's completely fine. But there must be other unit that is easy to kind of tack on an additional lens and a different perspective. So that's how I usually approach it. I find the easiest entry point to access the curriculum, and then, the rest is history. What's the second question?
We talked about collaboration, and then we just talked about the knowledge of the people around you. We talked about planning. So on that planning front, the front end versus sort of the evolving activity as it goes.
I do both, depending on what the project is. If it's a very involved project that involves more than 2 teachers, especially, I like to plan it ahead of time, just to make sure everyone has enough time to do their piece. And if anything needs to be tweaked, if materials needs to be ordered, we have enough time for ourselves. And normally for these ones are the more structured ones. Right? Then from the very get-go, I can sort of already envision what the end result is going to look like, right? For example, the dimension of the dollhouse was already determined. And because dimension has been determined, it predetermines the size of the furniture, right? And the preferred size of the wire sculpture. So there are some deciding factors that will kind of set the tone for the entire project and set the parameters for it. But there are other more free-form collaborative ones that I've done in the past where we're just like, you know what? This is an idea that we have. Let's put them together and see what happens. And then usually the music and art ones are kind of like that, where we're like, this is an idea. Let's try it. We're not sure what's going to happen, but let's just try it first. And then those are the ones we're often in the middle of it. We're like, oh, okay, let's simplify a little bit. let's see what the students want and maybe gear towards their interest. So then it's more less a fulfillment of curriculum expectations, but more like soft skills, collaboration, and focusing on their personal improvement in the course, and then just trying out something new with us. And we're usually really upfront with the students. We're like, hey guys, this is our first time doing it. We're going to have hiccups. Things are probably going to change. If you guys have any feedback about how you can make this better, if something you think is too difficult, let us know right away, and we can work that in, right? This is your project as much as it is ours, right? We're in this together. Like, let's experiment together, and then we're going to create this together. So, and that's the case for teachers and for students.
I really like that component of being really transparent with your students on where you are in a certain lesson. Because you're right, when I think of my teaching, there's certain units that I use over and over again and tweak and modify, and so that I can really speak on sort of student experiences, anticipate struggles and what's going on. But other times when I do start something new, it's always been important to say, we're going to make a music video today on what's going on in the song, but I've actually never done it before, so I don't really necessarily know what it's going to look like, and I don't have a model for you to look at. Although sometimes for me, I like exemplars, but I don't like them because sometimes I feel as soon as I show you one, I've limited some creativity because I've already inherently biased you on what the outcome's supposed to look like. But then sometimes when you don't have something to guide, you get there's a lot of work in between. It's messy work, I guess. And students will really, I always find sort of the elementary space, that middle school space, especially when you don't have that experience having taught something over and over again, it's really critical to sort of guide the first 2 or 3 students to some small successes, because they become what everyone else looks at, and they may not copy, but they're just looking for a success. They're looking for someone to bridge through. So I often find the whole class stalls collectively. And if you can get 3 or 4 that can make some headway or get some excitement about what they're doing, all of a sudden then the rest realize, I can be excited and I can go out and experiment. And my example was there. Last year was the first year I had ever taken the song "What's Going On," and we were doing social justice themes where they picked their own social justice theme. I gave them the audio track, and they had to make a music video for it. And they're like, "Well, how do we make one, Mr. Cheney?" Like, I don't know. I just know how to use WeVideo, and I gave you this audio file. Let's see what we get. And at the end, I have 23 vastly different themes and vastly different compositions around the song. The only thing definitively at the end was every time the first 3 bars of "What's Going On" came on, the whole class said, "Oh, I know what we're doing now, Mr. Cheney." So I like that component. I find that's always sort of a stall when I'm starting new stuff, is how do I push that through? I will share that elementary, although doesn't have necessarily different offices and departments, tends to have the same compartmentalization of people: primary, junior, intermediate. And you do have to make an effort to gravitate to teach, to interact with other grades. And one thing that I learned as I got as a better teacher, to be a better grade 8 teacher, was to really know what was going on in a grade 2 room and to see what tasks the grade 4 teachers were doing, rather than sort of expecting my students are going to jump into what I'm doing in 8. My program modified exponentially when I was more in tune and more aware of what the younger grades were doing. I wonder in the high school space, how does it impact, say, your teaching of science when you know what the art teacher is doing, when you know when the woodshop teacher is doing? Does it have an influence on what you feel you can do, or does it change the way you teach, knowing on how things are being taught in those spaces? You can comment on that. I'll come back to, we talked about your project. We talked about that one specific project with the wire figurines and the fashion, and now we have the doll house and all the furniture. An extension, you already talked about it briefly, about how students were thrilled by it. How do you celebrate that work? And I know, as I sort of think of myself as very strong in the digital space, that sometimes I forget at the end, in the digital space, it's very hidden in the digital world. How do you make that work stand out and be celebrated to sort of encourage that next round of learners, or to validate all the learning people have done? I often think in middle school, I sometimes forget that middle schoolers still need to see their work. They still want to see their work on the walls. They still want a little transformer sticker if I need to celebrate that work. So if you could comment on any of that stuff, it would be great.
For display, because we are fortunate to have physical display boxes in the school, so I make sure that their works are on display, and I kind of rotate them out. And then usually I'm more excited than the kids. I kind of parade their works around the school. I go into the office and be like, look what they have done. And then I tell my kids and be like, guys, I walked around the school with your projects today. Or like I just showed everyone, I invited them into my classroom and take a look at their work. They're like, oh, really? So they get that. And then also this year, what I'm trying is I want to put on like an art show and then invite the students and family and community members to come and take a look at it. So then we can have a large celebration with food. So the kids can really see that, oh, their work is being part of like this vibrant school culture, right? And this hands-on learning, this collaborative environment, and be proud, and not just amongst their friends, but also have their family come and see it. Because very often they would be like, Miss, can I come in? I want to show my friend my work. And I'm like, yeah, sure, come. But then it's very rare, I think, for their family to see the work in person. Because a lot of times the really good ones, I keep them as exemplars, or I keep them on the show. And my students are like, when are we getting it back? And I'm like, maybe when you graduate, I don't know. Remember to ask me for it.
That's right. Let them think they can keep asking for it, and you just conveniently, oh, sorry, not right now. Ask me again in 15 minutes. We'll see.
Yeah, and some of them, I tell them that it's going to be going on permanent display. So I've been intentionally collecting student work, and then again working with my colleague in the wood construction class. So his class has built so many things for me into these wooden frames, so we can put the paintings on, and then we're going to put them above lockers, and then they're on Velcro. Right. So eventually when they become outdated, or the students want them back, we just take it off and give it to the students and replace them.
Interesting. Betty, question. So I know you're a very innovative teacher. You love to try new things. And I think if you're listening from afar and this isn't necessarily where you feel your strength is, not that it isn't your strength, you maybe don't feel it. sometimes I find that when you watch teachers from afar that are sort of, say, on this, they appear as that they're super creative because you are creative, but sometimes they assume that you're doing this all the time with every lesson. It becomes inaccessible for people because they feel that they can't keep that pace all the time. Not that it has to be about math and numbers, but when I think of my program, I say I do some really wild and outside the box things. But behind that is also the foundations of basic things I do repeat. And so that I say when I do this task, 60% of my teaching is probably stuff I've done in the past, slightly modified, and that opens it up to be more experimental in other things that I do. If you could sort of break it down for teachers that are maybe trying to modify their planning and sort of go in a different direction, if you could break it down percentage-wise, like if you know you want to do a really creative project, how do you facilitate that when you think of your entire course load that you have to teach? Do you want to make sure you got 60% or 75% that these are stuff I've done in the past, but I'm going to aim for something new this year, more so than thinking that you, in the elementary space, I don't need to revolutionize my science and try to revolutionize my social studies, go gradeless, decide to do all thinking classrooms in the math class, and then do a fixation entirely on audio content in language. Where could you sort of help a new teacher sort of set some parameters to try to be explorative and new and creative, yet also be comfortable and confident that you have foundational pieces that you can rely on?
So the way I structure my course, in high school at least, I have 4 major units. So 3 units plus a culminating. And at the beginning of the course, unless it's a brand new course that I never taught before, I usually already have an idea of what are some of the major things that I want them to for sure hit. And usually, just for the sake of students having consistency in the room, I usually don't have more than one collaborative or super new project per course. So out of the 4, I may swap one of them out. Unless it's my grade 12s. I've been using my grade 12s as guinea pigs, and they seem to be okay with that. So with my 9, 10, 11, 70 to 75% of the course is set. And 25 to 30% I play around with. And then I sort of build that in on the first day when I go through the course outline. I said, here are what I have set in place for you. However, like this one project or that one project may change. And then I kind of have an idea of who I may be working with, and I kind of give them a heads up. I said, I'm not sure when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen during one of these months. And this is probably a teacher that we're going to be working with. And this is kind of the direction that we're thinking of going. We haven't ironed out the details yet. So I give them a heads up about that. And then as I'm talking about that, I sort of explain to them why it's important to have new project and experiment and collaborate. Because a lot of them are like, I don't want to work with other class. Be like, I don't want to leave this class. But then usually at the end of it, they're like, is there another one? Right? So, but just for the sake of not to stress them out and not to overwhelm them with too much change, I try to keep it under like 30%.
I like that you bring back to that student perspective that they also need those consistent pieces, that everything can't be an adventure. There's a little bit of focus. So many great pieces here. What is next for your next big project? So now that we've talked about this one of many original projects, do you have anything brewing at the moment that you're excited about to sort of keep your passion going for evolving and coming up with new content?
Yes. So the good thing about I've been doing collaborative project for a few years now. And then at the end of the year, sometimes we do like celebrations during staff meeting, and then they ask us to kind of show what we've done this year. And I just show these things to encourage others to work with each other and also to work with me. So because of that, some teachers will approach me and be like, hey, can I see your timetable? Is there any classes that can work together? Because the way that I do a lot of these is we take a look at our timetable. If we have a class I line up, perfect, right? Then that's a sign that we can go ahead with it, and if both people are on board. Grade level doesn't matter too much. We can tweak it so grade 9 class can work with the grade 12 class. It's mainly if we have the same time slot. right? Then we can gather all of them in the cafeteria, in the library, right, in the auditorium. And then so we can have that space where they're all together and working together. But the way that I design these collaboration is you're not constantly working together. I speak to my colleague and then we devise a plan. I teach my students, or I give them a heads up, or I kind of pave the way for this collaborative work in my course, and then they do the same thing in their course. And then we bring them together to work, maybe to find them partners or groups, and then they work together closely, maybe for 2 classes. And then we separate. So we each take the piece that we need to work on to our own classrooms, right? And then we make it very clear that they're only getting graded on the part that they contribute, and they won't be penalized for their partner's work because it's 2 separate classes. Yep. So for the majority of the collaborative process, we're actually separate. So it causes the least amount of disruption to their normal routine and to our teaching practice as well. And then during the middle of the project, we bring them back together again to share what they have done. And then the teachers we also take a look at where everybody is. Do we need to extend it? Do we need to change direction? Do we need to change the what we're looking for a little bit, or can we just continue to go ahead? And then at the very end, we may finish at different times. Maybe my students finish early. That's fine. Maybe they finish early and then my students continue. That is completely fine. There is no hard finish. But then after, at the very end, we will put everything together. If time permits, we do a large presentation all together. If not, then we kind of just stitch them together digitally or physically, and then we have a display to show everyone and the 2 classes is the result of their collaboration.
Betty, that's a great answer. One thing I picked out is we want to collaborate, and then there are some system issues that have to be in place. And I think too often in education, we always put the burden on teachers' shoulders to make it work. But you also have to acknowledge that the system has to allow it to work, and you can't fight the system in the sense of your scheduling, your timetabling. If they don't match, they simply don't match. I know Pav and I team teaching grade 8 this year. We've been able to partner up with the library to create different affinity groups for STEAM. So in our school, there was a real need and a real desire to give our girls really great space to create and explore. And so we've been able to create an all-girls grade 8 STEAM, an all-boys grade 8 STEAM, and then we've had collaborative STEAM projects in that. But the schedule allowed it. The librarian was free, the library is free, and it allowed us to move around. And so I think it is really important, and sometimes you're privileged to have a schedule that works in your favor, and sometimes, unfortunately, you don't. But I think it's really important to address that the schedule, the system, also plays into this power of collaboration. As an elementary teacher, when I think of how students collaborate, I think it's really important to hear that notion that students find their jobs and they break off. One thing I noticed in the grade 8 space, no matter whatever collaborative project you're doing, every student feels they need to do each job with each other together all the time. And so you can have a group of 4, and no matter what, they're only doing the work of 1 because they all team up to do the same thing. And I think even understanding that dynamics, especially in elementary, there's some coaching to this. Even when I think of something like choice boards, if you have a wonderful choice board and you give it to your grade 8 class and you haven't guided them and modeled them on how to make good choices and how to organize in time, they won't choose anything. And I always think in collaboration, when we do jobs, they all are working, but they don't get that in explicit instruction. Hey, we can divide this task into 4 little categories. You go off here and you go off and you work, and you maybe don't come back together physically to share a space to discuss something. For maybe in the elementary space, it's not the same duration of time, but it's the notion that you don't have to be in your group of 4 all working on the same portion of your project at the same time to keep going. So those are 2 great things. If I come back to you to wrap up this great conversation, because of course our theme has been about sort of the power, the inspiration behind designing your own lessons. You've talked about so many great points. If you were suggesting to new teachers or teachers that are switching grades where they need sort of a kickstart, a refresh or something new, how would you suggest, what sort of 3 points might you lend to teachers to say, hey, if you want to get into designing more of your own learning, more so than just taking from a textbook or a website, what might you advise? I won't say advise, not to give advice, but if you were in the conversation in the hallway and you would say, these are the 3 things that work for me to have these really original lessons, what would they be?
I think the first thing is it has to be something that is fun to the person. Like, I always go from what I'm interested and passionate about. And I think when I'm really passionate about something, that passion transfers to the students, right? Because when I'm teaching, like I just did a 2-part art history lesson to my students, and I was really animated in front of the classroom, and I was acting out kind of the thoughts of the artists. And I asked them, I said, does this way of teaching help our history come alive? And they're like, yeah, because I'm in the classroom kind of running around. I'm like, what are we thinking? And I think that sort of my interest, right, in the subject will help spark interest in the students. So the first thing I say is make sure what you're trying to do is something that you're actually interested in, you're actually passionate about. That's the first thing. Second, I think is, again, going back to what I already said, don't pressure yourself too much. I really think teaching is such a great profession. And when it turns into work, it really drowns out our initial love for teaching, right? To keep this, to keep the love alive, like I find that you have to see work almost as play. And we can't, so it kind of relates to the first one, right? The fun part. So how do we combine fun and learning? Is start something simple. Start with something simple. Start with something easy, and then slowly build upon it. Don't rush. Just when you're designing a new course, it's okay. Borrow 100% from someone. If someone's giving you all the course materials, just take it. Maybe at the very beginning, you just follow exactly what that person does. And as you get comfortable with it, you will naturally start to make things original and start to personalize and start to make it more for you, for the students. It's not a forced process, right? It will naturally occur. And so I definitely agree with you saying I think teachers sometimes think they're not creative, but they're doing creative problem solving every single day without knowing it. So give themselves more credit than they think they deserve. And thirdly is don't be afraid to approach people that they think may have the similar ideas or may have ideas that they can borrow or may be able to help them. I love having, yes, I love creating new lessons, but all of these can't be realized if I don't have colleagues supporting me. Teaching is not a solitary sport, and it can never be. I think it's so important to establish a good relational foundation between colleagues. That's why I mentioned the very first thing is if you don't have trust, if we don't have that common foundation, that common perspective, nothing can flourish. So it's really not about curriculum. It's not about content. It's about trusting in yourself and what you can do and allowing others to come in and, make a little bit changes to what we're used to and allowing that change to happen and, take some risks, experiment, but don't stress out if things don't work out. Don't force yourself to have to create a whole new lesson. There's no point in turning this into work.
Betty, these are perfect little hallway nuggets of how to sort of get into that sort of building and creating more of your own lessons. And you're just right. Follow your passions. You hope your school taps into your passions. Being comfortable. I would add on, as we watch from afar, I'll always be mindful that certain teachers will always have better positionality to do this. And I think of people that are in spots for long periods of time. I'll talk about myself because I've taught grade 8 for 23 years. So my ability to be flexible and risk take is not simply because I'm a risk taker in terms of what I start to plan. It's based on 22 years of experience sitting in the same, I've had 2 classrooms, but predominantly the same classroom almost all my life. And so there's a certain it's easier for me to maybe be a little bit more explorative and say if you're new in a building or you're new to a grade, you might watch that and say, well, I'm not doing that. But as a teacher, you got to be mindful of your positionality. So some of us are gifted more opportunities to embark on this kind of work. And it reminds me a lot of what ETT was fighting for when we were pondering that teachers that had been in areas for 10 plus years or 5 plus years, I can't remember exactly, could be asked to be transferred. And I think of all the things here about all the critical pieces that allow you to be a really creative teacher are really founded in trust. And trust comes from being in your school community, your grade community, your teaching partners for a long period of time. It's tough to build trust if we're sort of in the back of our mind thinking, I might not be here for a long time. And so those are a few of my add-ons. But Betty, this has been a great conversation. I'm already inspired. I'm already thinking about what I'm going to do tomorrow because I'm going to trash my lesson plans I had. If you have any final words to say, anything on teaching, your experience, please share them now. And if not, I'll just say to our audience, thank you for listening to Teacher Talk and ETT Podcast, really talking about teacher experience. Not someone talking about what teaching is, but teachers talking, you know it, teaching.
There was a question that you asked that I did not answer, and I kind of want to show you something. So you said if there is a project that is brewing and then I'm really excited about, there is one. I have to grab something.
Yeah.
Give me 1 second.
This will be great as Betty goes off to grab that project. And there's something inspiring about doing different things. Betty had talked about that notion of students pick up on your passion. And when you're sort of designing and building your own learning experiences, there is an unbelievable connection that students see that you're excited and they can't help but be excited as well. Betty, that's me filling the space. You're here. We can't wait to see what project you got brewing up.
So this is a grade 10 culminating project. So my grade 10s culminating, everybody picks a different social issue, and then they can do pick any topic. And then they have to visually represent how they're going to send the message they want to send through their artwork. So, and then the only thing I said to them, I said it can't be just a drawing. You have to try something you've never done before. If you've never tried painting, you can paint. If you have done painting before, that's also out of the question. So they're forced to do video. They're forced to create board games. They're forced to create sculptures. And then one of my students really wanted to talk about animal testing on makeup, in makeup companies. Mm-hmm. And her original idea was to draw a girl holding a mirror, and the mirror shows the face of a bunny that's, all bloodied up. And I said, and I remember there's a type of artwork, I forget the name, but where it's red and blue on each other, and then you make these lenses so you can see two different images. And I said, this will be perfect for your project, so I'm going to try this.
We see it. It's working.
And then you do the blue one.
Wow. What a project that is. Look at that. That is wicked.
So this turned out a lot better. Originally, I wasn't sure how it's going to turn out because she had to make her own lens, and I wasn't sure if the color was going to work out well. So we experimented with different blue and then see which one worked the better. Because then we weren't sure which one was going to work. But then this turned out so well. I thought for my NAC 10 course, it lines up with the MBE course, right? The Indigenous Focused Art and English class. I was thinking for our next collaboration, we're going to do something like this, where we can layer perspectives and we can layer narratives, right? And then I was thinking we can do illustrated poetry, where the English students can write poetry, and then my students can kind of create the different layers of imagery in blue and red. And then we each have the lens to see from different perspectives.
Betty, that is the perfect way to wrap up this episode. Seeing it absolutely in practice, how one great project inspires the next project. And you've been listening to Teacher Talk and ETT Podcast with Betty Zhang and your host today, Che Cheney.
Thank you so much.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Teacher Talk, an ETT podcast production. We hope you enjoyed this insightful discussion. We'd like to remind you to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps us reach more educators like yourself. Don't forget to visit our website at ett.ca. There, you'll find additional information and resources from ETT. The ideas and opinions shared on this podcast are our own and do not represent the viewpoint of any organization. We aim to provide a platform for open dialogue and thought-provoking conversations. If you have any topics you'd like us to cover or any questions you'd like us to address in future episodes, feel free to reach out to us on social media or email teachertalk@ett.on.ca. We love hearing from our community. Teacher Talk is a Chey&Pav Educational Services production where we strive to bring you the best educational production and professional development. You can connect with us at cheyandpav.com for all your podcasting needs. Until next time, keep inspiring, keep teaching, and keep making a difference in the lives of your students.